Well, it's been a long time since I gave a sermon in an empty room. When I was a rabbinical student, I would be so nervous about these first sermons that I would go into the open sanctuary, nobody was around, especially during those high holy days, and practice things over and over and over again. It's been a while since I entered into that kind of practice, but that's what's coming to mind. But there's something else that comes to mind, of course, something that I hope someone out there is listening to. I think of a melody that we sing here often, but it's more than just a melody. It starts off as a text from this great Hasidic rabbi from the end of the 1700s into the early 1800s. He dies in 1810. The words are Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od. Reb Nachman said that the world is a very narrow bridge. V'ha'ikar, the most important thing, v'ha'ikar, the most significant principle is lo lefached, don't be afraid. So I want to talk about that for a little bit. Have you ever been on a narrow bridge? Well, I've been on a couple. And frankly, I'm terrified. The one narrow bridge, I didn't realize was narrow when I was younger, because if you go from Long Island into Brooklyn, you go on the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. That's just what you do. But after living in Connecticut some, and after living in Atlanta some, we drove out to New York from Atlanta when our kids were really very little. And I had to go on the Verrazano Bridge, and the lanes were narrow, and the car I was driving was much wider than the car I had when I was a teenager, or the car that, the family car growing up in. Those lanes were narrow. And even as an adult driving for many, many years at that point, I was scared. Maybe it was just, coming out of Brooklyn, that could have been a part of it. It was my New Yorker driving that I haven't done in a while. I was being polite because I was living in Georgia. That could have been a part of it. But I felt narrow, and it was constricting, and I had to really focus. The other narrow bridge I thought about was when my daughters were young. My wife, Deborah, and I took them on a trip to North Carolina. Again, we were living in Atlanta at the time. And at Grandfather Mountain, there is something called the Mile High Swinging Bridge. And my daughters thought it was a good idea that we would go on this mile high. Did I say it was a mile high? It was a mile-high swinging bridge. So that's not one you drive on, that's one you walk on. It was very narrow, certainly much more narrow than this table. It was a mile high, and it was quite a long way across to get to the other side. And again, I was terrified. I'm not somebody who really has an appreciation for heights. So Reb Nachman says that the whole world is like a narrow bridge, and the most important thing is don't be so scared. And I look at this text, and I'm kind of amazed by it, because he faced his own challenges too, his own emotional health challenges. And I think he really felt like the whole world was a narrow bridge. But I don't think he really meant that we shouldn't be afraid. I don't think that he meant that we should never be afraid. Sometimes when you're feeling narrowed in and confined and constricted, it's okay to be afraid, but we don't want to be so afraid that we're paralyzed, that we're frozen in the middle of that mile-high swinging bridge, because that's not a good place to be. Our anxiety goes even higher. Our fears go even higher. It is a place that we feel like we have no control. And I think he struggled with the world and felt that it was really narrow. And I think he really was acknowledging that it was scary for him, but he wasn't going to live his life that way. That's what I'm thinking about tonight. On the one hand, I can say so easily and kind of cavalierly that we shouldn't be afraid, but I actually think we should. And I actually think it's okay. Because if we are a little bit afraid, we're going to think twice about things. But we can't be so afraid that we're stuck on the Verrazano Narrows or on the mile-high swinging bridge. Today is an important day. For me, today is the day where I won't feel like the whole world is a narrow bridge, even though my access to the world is getting more narrow. I'm afraid, but it's not going to paralyze me, and I hope and pray it doesn't paralyze us. In the thinking about what to share with you, I remember hearing a story some years ago about the great Musar leader, and we have a lot of folks in our congregation that study Musar, this meditative spiritual practice in Jewish tradition that focuses on midot, on qualities and virtues and characteristics that God has and that we have. And the founder of this, or leader in this Musar movement, was a rabbi named Israel Salanter. And there's a story that there was a cholera epidemic in 1846. And this great rabbi, Israel Salanter, went in front of the congregation, right to the front. He washed his hands. He made the blessing over the bread, the motzi, and then he ate the bread. But it wasn't just during an epidemic. It was also Yom Kippur. Rabbi Salanter, this great scholar and leader and activist and thinker, got in front of his Yom Kippur congregation, washed his hands, and made a motzi and ate a piece of bread. The Jewish community's most sacred of days, holiest days, marked by fasting, refraining from all food and drink, Rabbi Salanter ate bread in front of everybody in the congregation. So why do you think he did that? Well, I forgot we're alone in here. But you think about that out there. Why would he have done that? Well, I'll tell you. In the midst of a terrible epidemic, he was modeling for a whole community how it was important to eat and take care of himself, strengthen and sustain his bodies, even when Jewish law wouldn't necessarily have approved. Even when Jewish tradition and the rabbi said that was the wrong thing to do. In front of a whole congregation that was feeling vulnerable, he said, we need to strengthen ourselves and nurture ourselves and nourish ourselves, and don't put ourselves in harm's way. On Yom Kippur, it's kind of an amazing thing for me to think about it. Not only did he choose life, he engaged in a principle of pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh is the Jewish legal principle that you can basically break almost any Jewish law in order to save a life, including our own. But it's not just about us that we're trying to save. We didn't close the synagogue just to watch out for ourselves. It's to watch out for other people. That was actually the more important thing, because I could get the flu again. I go in the room, my family locks me in there, they bring me food, I get a remote control all to myself. There's something that could be potentially positive about that for me, but I know that I'll get through it. I'll get sick. It'll be inconvenient. It might even be uncomfortable or even hurt. But I'm going to be okay. But there's others that we cannot guarantee that. We're always talking about who are the vulnerable among us. Sometimes that's me, and sometimes that's you. Pikuach nefesh, he modeled it. Choosing life. This is what we need to do. Choose life and model how we're going to do so for others. I read a reading, people were sharing it on Facebook naturally, the other Torah, and there's a Catholic blogger in Seattle, and her name is Cameron Bellm, B-E-L-L-M. I want to read what she wrote because it hit me right here. She wrote, "May we who are merely inconvenienced remember those whose lives are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health or making their rent. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when their schools close remember those who have no options. May we who have to cancel our trips remember those who have no safe place to go. May we who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no margin at all. May we who settle in for a quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country, let us choose love. During this time when we cannot physically wrap our arms around each other, let us yet find ways to be the loving embrace of God to our neighbors. Amen. I feel less fear, and I feel less lonely. Lonely in Hebrew is a similar word to quarantine, bidud. I feel less fear and loneliness when I actually do something and don't just sit with it. When I make a choice within my framework of faith, within my spiritual worldview to make a difference in one way that I can. So for me, one way I can do something is by keeping you folks at home. I actually think that was an important action. And I think we all have to do more. So call someone. Call someone you know and say that you're thinking of them. Call someone you don't know and see if they're okay. And if you want someone who you don't know and it's safe to call, let us know, because we're calling our congregants and making sure they're okay. We could use the help. You can help us do that. You can make a difference by staying away from big groups and reclaim a sense of Sabbath and rest at home. So take your sadness and fear and loneliness, whatever it is, and translate it into courageous, audacious power of presence, even through distance. I share often that I think the story of creation isn't the history of how we're created, or it's more about why we're here than how we got here. And in the story of creation, it says that there's this tohu vavohu, and biblical scholars don't really know how to translate it, but it's often translated as chaos and void, which of course don't make sense together. Chaos and void, something with nothing and something with everything. I believe that God created the world with everything and nothing, tohu vavohu, and little by little started to make order. And in this ordering became 1 day and 2 days and 3 days, and there were stars, and there was light, and there were animals, and there were fish, and there were cockroaches, and there were us. And in this ordering process, after 6 days, God ceased, and by that point, we were around. And I think we are here to be partners with God to finish the work of creation. I don't think it's done. And this coronavirus shows us that the chaos that is embedded in creation sometimes bubbles up to the surface, literally. And if we are God's partners, we have to help with that ordering. Our scientists, our healthcare practitioners, the pharmacists, the doctors, the nurses, whomever it is that might be taking care, the folks that are our therapists. Think of all of the people who feel that it's so hard to confront if we're already confronting so much. All of these people help with the ordering, restoring integrity to a broken world when chaos comes out screaming. Let's be partners with each other and with God. Let's be partners and restore integrity to our planet, not just to the synagogue, not just to the county, not just to America, but to the whole world. If this pandemic teaches anything, it's that no matter where we are from, no matter what country we are from, we're all of one breath. We're all part of one Creator. Can't we learn that already? So be partners and be gentle. Be gentle with us for making synagogue life a little harder, but that's okay. Be gentle with yourselves, because we're all making decisions as best as we possibly can. Be gentle with your neighbors when they get diagnosed, and they will. Be gentle with them. Remember the vulnerable on your street and in the congregation and amongst your family and down the road and in the county. Those with the virus, those with no home or support system or tribe behind them, those who are a bit older and more susceptible to the virus, who might not be able to fight it as well as I can or some of you. Let's be gentle with our presence in the world. Let's make compassion and love and justice and resilience, let's make those things contagious. Let's spread goodness and kindness, and let's say amen.